Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author. In this video, we're going to start by covering another Memorandum of Understanding, except this one's a little bit different. It lists a WSP contract number, K, that's the kilo, 16529. However, at the top it also has this K, as in kilo, 21-007. It is a memorandum of understanding between the Washington State Patrol and the Grant County Juvenile Court, allegedly. However, down here at the bottom we have FBI, that's as in Fox Bravo India, MOU, CHRI, it's Charlie Hotel Romeo India, AAG, or Alpha Alpha Golf, approved, NCGA November Charlie Juliet Alpha _ Rev REV, or I believe that would be like reference or whatever, 1221 or 12-21-20. As I mentioned before, it is apparently between the Washington State Patrol WSP and the Grant County Juvenile Court, a quote, non-criminal justice agency, hereinafter the NCJA. Now here's the interesting thing. See, despite the title saying it's the Grant County Juvenile Court, which in itself is suspicious, the use of the term later, NCJA, sounds like a separate sort of standalone type of letter agency, not even the Grant County Juvenile Court. So the question being, is the Grant County Juvenile Court pretending to be the NCJA, or whatever it's called, or is the NCJA pretending to be the Grant County Juvenile Court? So that's sort of, I suppose, more like the question about who came first, the chicken or the egg, because all of this stuff is just cover for various operations through the idea of sanctification. That idea being that when you sanctify something, it is beyond question. So this whole idea of blanketly applying something called law enforcement means you're not allowed to question it. That's sanctification. And that's sort of what they're doing here. And you see it in the wording in all of these documents, that the people writing the documents expect nothing in these documents to ever be questioned. At the same time, it appears that the people writing these documents are giving directives to two or more separate entities, and those entities itself, despite the fact that it's stating that it's an agreement, are not actually involved in this paperwork, but rather being directed or dictated to by an author who has not affixed their name to the paperwork. And that's, of course, more of what we're looking at here. So, Criminal History Record Information, CHRI, Charlie Hotel Romeo India, Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. This MOU provides guidance for the creation, viewing, modification, transmission, dissemination, storage, and destruction of CHRI data. That is a classification marking. You classify something in this context either CHRI confidential or CHRI PII confidential, or something along those lines. This document, when you read it and you have any background in the intelligence field whatsoever, should raise your eyebrows, because the stuff that they're talking about here is extensive. It is overkill, as some might say, for the type of information they're saying, and it appears that what this document is talking about is something highly sensitive. It is information that they above all else want to control, and they are using measures that are far beyond the scope of the alleged information being collected through this document. The NCJA, part of the NCJA responsibilities is the disposal of physical and electronic media used to process CHRI. CHRI received as a result of licensing or employment purposes pursuant to Housing and Urban Development HUD and or Purpose Code X emergency placement. Now that is something to notice. Purpose Code X emergency placement, specifically with use of the word Grant County Juvenile Court. Emergency placement is a cover story for which children are stolen and trafficked to facilities which have previously been insulated on military bases to have their bio or body used as used for the extraction of certain chemicals and pharmaceuticals, among other things. So access to CHRI by authorized officials is subject to cancellation if dissemination is made outside the receiving departments, related agencies, or other authorized entities. All fingerprint-based application submissions must include the reason, fingerprinted field, and accurate representation of the purpose and or authority for which the CHRI is to be used. The NCJA must notify the applicant's fingerprint that the fingerprints will be used to check the criminal history records of the FBI. The NCJA shall, outsourcing of non-criminal justice administrative functions requiring access to CHRI to either another governmental agency or private contractor acting as an agent for the authorized receiving agency complies with the Security and Management Control Outsourcing Standard for non-channelers. Now here's the big deal. What is the use of the word non-channelers? That's a question. That's very odd. That's a term in use currently for people who do, quote, remote viewing or channel dead spirits and that sort of thing. So why are they using the word here non-channeler? And to what does it apply? And it's not included in any of the definitions, the use of the word non-channeler. On the other side of it, there's no definitions using the word channeler either. In addition, what they're doing is the usual multi-layered rabbit hole, the white rabbit being a rabbit hole of paperwork. So the white rabbit is the thing that bounces between paperwork, and the white color is, of course, the paper itself. The paper's white. So that's what it means when you follow the white rabbit. You are following the paper trail, right? The rabbit hole, the rabbit trail. The NCJA will ensure all appropriate staff members are trained according to the state and federal requirements, of course, which they'll make up and write, whatnot, including this garbage, which they'll say is, quote, state and federal requirements. And that's it. That's all you need to know. As long as they declare it is therefore so. Criminal history, record information responsibilities. The NCJA shall conform to system policies as established by the FBI, CJIS Division, and WSP before access to CHRI is permitted. This will allow for control over the data and give assurance of system security. The rules and procedures governing access to CHRI shall apply equally to all participants in the system. All non-criminal justice agencies with access to CHRI data must designate a specific unit, position, or personnel to access CHRI. Non-criminal justice agencies must advise WSP of such personnel changes to each designation. That's what we call an access roster. All non-criminal justice agencies with access to CHRI data from the system shall permit an FBI, CJS Division, or WSP audit team to conduct appropriate audits. The NCJA must cooperate with these audits and respond promptly. Now, I know from other things embedded in this documentation that all of this nonsense is being done by attorneys, but the actual hand behind this stuff is the question. It's the hidden hand that has no apparent identity on any of the evidence, but is clearly behind these types of things. It could be a computer program. The NCJA must have someone designated as the IT point of contact, ITPOC, identifies using WSP-approved hardware, software, and firmware, and ensure no unauthorized individuals or processes, right, doing like that addition there, or processes have access to the same. Identify and document how the equipment is connected to the state system. Ensure that personnel security screening procedures are being followed as stated in the CJIS security policy. And here on the second page, which is a little bit out of order, it states the professional services agreement to adult drug discretionary grant. That's weird. The 12th Monday, or this 12th day of January, it's kind of weird, it says 12M, day of January 2021. So there's a date for you. Contractor, Ellen Goodman, of 1711 Camden Park Drive, Southwest, Olympia, Washington. signed January 27, 2021. Next, you have Barbara J. Vasquez, clerk of the board, as approved as to form. Kevin J. McCree, chief civil deputy prosecutor. There's your attorney, of course, one of them anyway, or attorney cover, if you will. Board of Commissioners, Cindy Carter, chair, Danny Stone, vice chair, and Rob Jones, member. Those are just cover identities that have to be, check marked on paperwork according to their quote-unquote regulations, and is, of course, a way of identifying whether or not somebody swooped in and scooped up their false identities and started using them for different purposes. The NCJA shall have a written policy for the discipline of policy violators. Don't you love that little nasty tone? The leveraging of a label as policy violator, right? Like jaywalker, or like addict, or drug user, or adulterer, or promiscuous, or felon, or the list goes on. Pirate, right? It has been long in use, the idea of labeling someone as something simply as a means out of vindictive spirit, meaning calling someone else names. Name calling is the usual term for it. It's something that petulant children do. It is in common use historically by individuals who are what you would consider to be civilians. Name calling is not considered to be something useful to do in military circles. You will, of course, find very petty military people who might use name calling as a tactic, but it generally speaking doesn't work. It's much more effective in civilian circles where emotion and how you feel about something is more important than logic or reason. In an environment where practicality demands that you remove your emotions from the situation, your personal involvement, in order to get a certain job done to achieve a certain mission, task, or operation, because you have to and there's no other choice behind it, because you simply must or die, then you will have less of the vindictive use of name calling, because it's not helpful, it's not useful, and it's not analytical. And that's, of course, what you see here with the term use policy violators, the name calling. All information technology IT employees who have access to and those who have direct responsibilities to configure and maintain FBI CJS systems must review security awareness training within 6 months of their appointment or assignment. A physically secure location is a facility, a criminal justice conveyance, or an area, a room, or a group of rooms within a facility with both physical and personnel security controls sufficient to protect CJI and associated information systems. The perimeter of the physical security location will be prominently posted and separate from non-secure locations by physical controls. Security parameters shall be defined, controlled, and secured. And of course, this is going to get a lot more into what appears to be extremely excessive control measures for information that would be applicable to a intelligence group, outfit, or some type of secretive entity which controls highly sensitive information related to operations that may or may not be considered treasonous by many individuals or groups out there, and above all else can in fact provide pretext sufficient to eliminate physically from reality, from life, various members and operatives in that operation. That looks like the approach here. That's the motive. No matter what the declared intent is, the motive here aligns with what an intelligence service conducting various operations of espionage, sabotage, destruction, and warfare would be doing. All physical access points in the agency's secure areas will be authorized before granting access. The agency will implement access controls and monitoring of physical secure areas for protecting all transmission and display mediums of CHRI. All personnel with physical and or logical access to CHRI and are not escorted must meet the minimum personnel screening requirements prior to CHRI access. To verify identification, state of residency, and national fingerprint-based record checks shall be conducted prior to granting access to CJI/CHRI for all personnel who have unescorted access to unencrypted CJI, CHRI, or unescorted access to physically secure locations or controlled areas. All authorized personnel with physical or logical access to CHRI will take the required security awareness training in CJIS online within 6 months of being granted duties that require CHRI access and every 2 years thereafter. Now here's the kicker down here. And it reminds me of the idea of burn after reading the title of a really stupid movie, but also as a concept where after you read something, you burn it because you don't want that information getting into anyone else's hands. When CHRI is stored, agencies shall establish appropriate administrative, technical, and physical safeguards to ensure the security and confidentiality of the information. These records shall be stored for extended periods only when they are key elements for the integrity and/or utility of case files and/or criminal record files. Everything else is destroyed. The NCJA shall securely store digital and physical media within physically secure locations or controlled areas. The agency shall restrict access to digital and physical media to authorized individuals. If physical and personnel restrictions are not feasible, then the data shall be encrypted. Immigration enforcement responsibilities. Neither WSP nor any of its members may contract in any way to provide civil or non-criminal immigration enforcement assistance, including through agreements for task force participation, mutual aid, data sharing, communications, dispatch, or any other agreement that shares resources and/or provides data as described herein. The NCJA shall not use or share WSP resources and/or data, including any individual's personal information ascertained by the WSP or its personnel, with any third parties to support or engage in civil or non-criminal immigration activities. The prohibition on information sharing includes place of birth, present location, release date from detention, if applicable, and family members' names. Incidents of disclosure of such personal information shall be considered a breach of this agreement and shall be reported to a designated WSP official. Now, we have to remember that the title for this document is the Grant County Juvenile Court, and I guarantee you that despite the current context of propaganda being propagated, this purpose, the motive behind this specifically and in the majority, applies to child trafficking. They are using the cover of quote-unquote immigration law enforcement nonsense to protect and insulate their child harvesting, child trafficking operations, just as they did using the military. However, in every and all case, the individuals involved in this stuff are civilians. They are never ever military. They are high-ranking civilians who are quote-unquote in control of military assets, and in this case in control of quote law enforcement resources. For the Washington State Patrol Information Security Officer lists a P.O. Box of 42619, Olympia, Washington. For NCJA, it lists a Suhail Palacios, P.O. Box 818, Ephrata, Washington. Now, what's interesting is that S. Palacios at grantcountywashington.gov is the email for that individual. It does not, of course, say Grant County Juvenile Court, which is interesting. Indemnification. To the extent permitted by law, each party shall defend, protect, and hold harmless the other party from and against all claims, suits, and/or actions arising from any negligent or intentional act or omission of that party's employees, agents, and/or authorized subcontractors while performing this MOU. In the event that a dispute arises under this MOU, it shall be resolved by a dispute board as follows. The chief of the WSP or designee shall appoint one member to the dispute board. The NCJA shall appoint one member to the dispute board, and the chief of the WSP or designee and the NCJA shall jointly appoint an additional member to the dispute board. The dispute board shall evaluate the dispute and make a determination of the dispute. The determination of the dispute board shall be final and binding on the parties hereto, if applicable, and as an alternative to this process, blah, 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 that doesn't matter. However, what we want to look at here is they are doing the usual of attempting to make it look like there are more involved than actually are, and most of these are simply cover identities being propagated by at most one person, or at minimum. Sometimes you have at most maybe three, but there's usually not many, and they like to make their nice little councils and boards and appoint those people to it, and they only ever appoint stuffed shirts and shills and people who are easy order takers who will simply do what they're told and are extremely easy to push over and threaten. On the other hand, the individuals hiding behind it, above all else, want to avoid discovery because they know what they're doing. There is, in fact, state of mind involved. Now, this is signed down here This is not signed by John R. Batiste, Chief of Washington State Patrol. It is, however, signed January 7th, 2021, Suhail Palacios, Juvenile Court Administrator. On the next page, though, it is signed by a Simon T. in the section for John R. Batiste, Chief, which is odd. Digitally signed by Simon T. Date January 21st, 2021. Simon T. is spelled Sierra, India, Mike, Oscar, November, space, Tango, Echo, Echo. That's most likely a fake name. Then you have Barbara J. Vasquez, CMC, Clerk of the Board, approved as to form January 7th, 2021. And then a Kevin McCrae, WSBA number 43087, Chief Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. Isn't that a nice little title he's got there? Board of County Commissioners, Grant County, Washington, Cindy Carter, Chair, Danny E. Stone, Vice Chair, and Rob Jones, Member. Now this next part, Exhibit A, is National Crime Prevention and Privacy Compact Council's Security and Management Control Outsourcing Standards for Non-Channelers, May 16, 2018. Here's where we get into the really details of this hanky operation that definitely appears to be more than it is wanting you to believe, and follows the lines that you would expect from what some might call secret squirrels or high-speed, low-drag individuals who get into the realm of some really hanky, really sticky situations, shall we say. Secure and integrity for criminal history and record information, as I said before, CHRI, while under the control or management of an outsourced third party, the contractor. Security commensurate with the risk and magnitude of harm resulting from the loss, misuse, or unauthorized access to or modification of information. Let's read that again. Security commensurate with the risk and magnitude of harm resulting from the loss, misuse, or unauthorized access to or modification of information. So it does sound like there is a great deal of risk, magnitude of harm, as it says here, for whatever this data is that they're collecting, that they conveniently have located into, shall we say, vague terms. It's got a cover story that most of this data is just like, regular administrative processing stuff of personal identifiable information. That's the reason for the extensive amount of control. Well, that's everybody else's perspective, but these people couldn't really give a crap about that. They do, of course, want to protect for operational purposes the identity of their minions. There's other information that is far more important for these people, and all of it relates to loss of their control. And that is the perspective coming through here. Loss, misuse, or unauthorized access. That's what they care about. Compact Council, as I mentioned before, that's a term used here. Under definitions, Chief Administrator means the primary administrator of a non-party state's criminal history record repository, or a designee of such administrator who is a regular full-time employee of the repository, who is also referred to as a State Identification Bureau, SIB chief. Sounds like a chief of station, doesn't it? The CIA term. Contractor means a government agency or private business, non-profit organization, or individual that is not itself an authorized recipient with respect to particular non-criminal justice purposes, who has entered into contract with the authorized recipient to perform non-criminal justice administrative functions requiring access to CHRI. So, as I said before, layers of separation, the proverbial rabbit hole, the white rabbit, paper trail, etc. They are forming many, many layers of separation. You have first the administrative entity or whatever nonsense, the agency involved. And then you have the authorized recipient, and then the authorized recipient has a contractor, and then the contractor is a subcontractor, and you know how they like to spread that stuff out. Dissemination means the disclosure of 3 CHRI. That sounds like another classification to me. So CHRI level 3 by an authorized recipient to authorized contractor, and that's 3 Roman numerals, by the way, or by the contractor to another authorized recipient consistent with the contractor's responsibilities with limitations imposed by federal blah blah blah. But their rules, procedures, and standards are established by the Compact Council and the United States Attorney General. Those are your cover identities right there. In addition, when you look at this stuff, you see that it could do a loop where they have the alleged authorized recipient, contractor, subcontractor, contractor, or authorized recipient, and then contractor, subcontractor, so they can move information around among each other and, of course, destroy it at the source. So it's also an information laundering system. Identity History Summary, IDHS, for the purpose of this outsourcing, standard means a report of all identification, demographic, and event information, criminal and or civil, within the next generation identification, NGI identity record, which may be disseminated to an authorized recipient. Non-criminal justice purposes, as provided in Article 118 of the Compact, means uses of criminal history records for purposes authorized by federal or state law other than the purposes related to criminal justice activities, including employment, suitability, licensing determinations, immigration and naturalization matters, and national security clearances. Boy, that's a big deal right there. National security clearances being run out of, again, national security clearances being run out of Grant County Juvenile Court. Imagine that. The outsourcing standard authorizes access to CHRI for non-criminal justice purposes, limits the use of the information to the purposes for which it is provided, prohibits retention and or dissemination, except as specifically authorized, ensures the security and confidentiality of the information, provides for audits and sanctions, provides conditions for termination of the contract, and contains such other provisions as the Compact Council may require. PII breach means a loss of control, compromise, unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized acquisition, unauthorized access, or any similar term referring to situations where persons other than the authorized user and for other than authorized purposes have access or potential access to PII, whether physical or electronic. Positive identification as provided in Article I-20 of the Compact means a determination based upon a comparison of fingerprints or other equally reliable biometric identification techniques that the subject of a record search is the same person as the subject of a criminal history record or records indexed in the 3 system. Let's read that again, the last part, because that's what's important. Or records indexed in the 3 system. Something to note is that the Roman numeral 3 is also commonly used by the quote-unquote 3%ers and many other groups. It is a coded meaning symbol, or a symbol that has other meanings behind it. Identifications based solely upon a comparison of subjects' names or other non-unique identification characteristics or numbers or combinations of thereof shall not constitute positive identification. Positive ID, by the way, is also a term used in intelligence circles for target. When you have positive ID on the target from 3 or more sources, separate sources, then you have full confirmation that that's the individual that you're looking for and to take them out, essentially, by whatever means is ascribed to it, missile, drone, shooter, etc. Assassination, they could die of a cold or some type of sickness, right? They could go to a hospital and not walk out, etc. So that's the idea of positive identification. It is generally speaking used as a term for a target, one way or the other. Prior to engaging in outsourcing any non-criminal justice administrative functions, the authorized recipient shall A. request and receive a written permission from 1. the State Compact Officer, Chief Administrator, or the FBI Compact Officer, and provide the State Compact Officer, Chief Administrator, or the FBI Compact Officer copies of the specific authority from the outsourced work. The authorized recipient shall execute a contract or agreement prior to providing a contractor access to CHRI. The contract shall at minimum incorporate by reference and have appended thereto this outsourcing standard. The authorized recipient shall understand the communications and record capabilities of the contractor, which has access to federal or state records, though through or because of its outsourcing relationship with the authorized recipient. The authorized recipient shall request and approve a topological drawing which depicts the interconnectivity of the contractor's network configuration as it relates to the outsourced functions. Isn't that interesting that they say that? Authorized recipient shall request and approve a topological drawing which depicts the interconnectivity of the contractor's network configuration as it relates to the outsourced functions. Wonder what format that drawing is supposed to be in, and why that specific method. It's kind of interesting. The authorized recipient shall appoint an information security officer, serve as the security POC for the FBI CJIS Division Information Security Officer. So let's read that again. The authorized recipient shall appoint an information security officer, which will serve as the security point of contact for the FBI CJIS Division Information Security Officer. The contractor shall develop, document, administer, and maintain a security program, physical personnel, and information technology to comply with the most current outsourcing standard. In addition, the contractor is also responsible to set, maintain, and enforce the standards for the selection, supervision, and separation of personnel who have access to CHRI. It's called compartmentalization. If the contractor is using a corporate policy, it must meet the requirements outlined in this outsourcing standard for the CJIS security policy. If the corporate policy is not this specific, it must flow down to a level where the documentation supports these requirements. Annual refresher training shall also be provided. Contractors shall annually, no later than the anniversary date of the contract, certify in writing to the authorized recipient that annual refresher training was completed for those contractor personnel with access to CHRI. We in the Marine Corps called that annual training, and it was excessive to the extent that it could be considered for purposes of sabotage, specifically because in our unit, annual training and all of this other excessive repetitive nonsense of which you had redundancy, meaning you had like something like 4 different sexual harassment classes that you had to take, and some of them were longer than others, online and in person. It was so excessive and made to be of utmost importance as to significantly interfere with the task, mission, or purpose of that unit, leading, of course, to the easy determination that the intention was sabotage, for which the sentence can be death, especially considering that that is, in fact, treason. So the contractor shall maintain a log of any dissemination of CHRI for a minimum of 365 days. The authorized recipient shall ensure that the contractor site is a physically secure location to protect against any unauthorized access to CHRI. And it repeats again, an up-to-date log concerning dissemination of CHRI shall be maintained by the contractor for a minimum of 1 year retention period. Now here's what's interesting here. Why in one line up here does it say for a minimum of 365 days, and then down here say for a minimum of 1 year retention period? That's a question, right? Authorized recipient with unique identifiers to include the FBI assigned originating agency identifiers, to include the FBI assigned originating agency identifier ORI, originating agency case OCA number, B, the transaction control number, C, the date of dissemination, D, the statutory authority for dissemination, and E, the means of dissemination. System security. Devices shall be implemented to provide a point of defense and a controlled and audited access to CHRI, both from inside and outside the networks. And what's important to note also here, again, is that this is the Grant County Juvenile Court, made by the Grant County Juvenile Court Administrator, 1, and 2, lists a repository of non-participating state information, meaning they are in fact collecting information nationwide, being administered and going to Grant County Juvenile Court under very steep security regulations, very steep. Sanitization procedures for all fixed and non-fixed storage media. Sanitization, of course, as most people understand it, to meaning redaction of particular information in highly sensitive documents. To prevent and or detect unauthorized access to CHRI in transmission or storage, each authorized recipient, contractor, or subcontractor must be assigned a unique identifying number. The authorized recipient shall develop and maintain a written policy for discipline of contractor employees who violate the security provisions of this contract. Isn't that nice? Once again we get into the really vindictive, nasty tone of the author, who's obviously got some type of emotional entanglement here, and sounds and reads quite a lot like what you would consider a narcissist, of which our so-called current governments, the corporate side, could be considered narcissists. The way that governments today act, quote-unquote governments, is as they are separate from the people, and they are in fact owners and masters of the people. And the employees in those so-called governments act that way too, and that you simply by deigning to ask them questions about the validity of what they're doing is tantamount to the most heinous of crimes. That's how they act, because everything is done by and for the corporate government. The corporate government does nothing for the people. The people exist for the government. That's how the situation is set up today, and you see that exact viewpoint and tone coming through in this paperwork. The authorized recipient shall develop and maintain a written incident reporting plan for security events to include violations and incidents. Pending investigation, the contractor shall, upon detection or awareness, suspend any employee who commits a security violation from assignments in which he/she has access to CHRI under the contract. The contractor shall immediately, within 1 hour of discovery, notify the authorized recipient, the state compact officer, chief administrator, or the FBI of any security violation to include unauthorized access to CHRI. The authorized recipient shall immediately, within 4 hours, notify the state compact officer / chief administrator and the FBI compact officer of any security violation or termination of the contract to include unauthorized access to CHRI made available pursuant to the contract. The authorized recipient and contractor shall provide written notice through the state compact officer, chief administrator, if applicable, to the FBI compact officer of the following: the termination of a contract for security violations involving the unauthorized access to CHRI, the contractor's name and unique identification number, the nature of the security violation, whether the violation was intentional, and the number of times the violation occurred. The compact officer / chief administrator, compact counsel, and the United States Attorney General reserve the right to audit the authorized recipient and the contractor's operations and procedures at scheduled or unscheduled times. The outsourcing standard does not confer, grant, or authorize any rights, privileges, or obligations to any person other than the contractor, the authorized recipient, compact officer / chief administrator, where applicable, and the FBI. The following document is incorporated by reference and made part of this outsourcing standard, the CJIS security policy. And this stuff being written out of Grant County Juvenile Court. Isn't that amazing? That's just too amazing. But really it's not. It's more par for the course with this garbage. Appropriate notices, assurances, and correspondence to the FBI compact officer, compact counsel, and the United States Attorney General required by Section 8.0 of this outsourcing standard shall be forwarded by first-class mail to FBI compact officer, 1000 Custer Hollow Road, Module D3, Clarksburg, West Virginia, 26306. Duties of the State Compact Officer / Chief Administrator. The State Compact Officer / Chief Administrator shall review legal authority. Does that sound like an attorney? I think it does. And respond in writing to the authorized recipient's request to outsource non-criminal justice administrative functions. 90-day compliance review. The State Compact Officer / Chief Administrator shall work in the coordination for the authorized recipient to conduct an audit of the contractor within 90 days of the date the contractor first received CHRI under the approved outsourcing agreement. State Compact Officer / Chief Administrator reserves the right to investigate or decline to investigate any report of unauthorized access to CHRI. And I believe a good title for this video at this point would be Outsourcing Child Trafficking, because that is, of course, the motive behind it. But there's many other motives to it. You don't want to put that immediately as the primary motive, because there is also the operational enemy motive of espionage, sabotage, and general warfare. The rolling out of quote-unquote law enforcement thugs as a front line against the public, the individual people of the nation and that live in the country. Now, this next document is a part of that concept, the ability to leverage a law enforcement army against the people at will by an individual who is hidden behind many layers of separation, the paper trail, the rabbit hole, the white rabbit, and who has no apparent identity associated with these types of damning documents. Policy and Procedures Manual, Leads Warrant Entry Procedures. To establish procedures for entering information into the Law Enforcement Automated Data System LEADS, that's Lima Echo Alpha Delta Sierra, Warrant and Wanted Person File, W and W, Whiskey and Whiskey, and the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, or November Charlie India Charlie, Wanted Files. Members shall complete the first page of the Warrant Registry Information Packet, Appendix A, and attach a copy of the warrant to the packet. The following guidelines will determine the pickup radius. 1. Nationwide is not used unless authorized by the Chief of Police. That just means an attorney writes under the Chief of Police name some sort of auto-pen signature, because there really is no Chief of Police, just a hired actor. And that is sufficient justification. The records coordinator shall perform the following tasks. Log the warrant registry packet into the warrant logbook, conduct a CCH and BMV check of the subject. So that sounds like the quote-unquote records coordinator is the real one who holds the operational power here, because they're the ones responsible for simply putting it into the system. Operationally, they are the administrator, and therefore they can file whatever paperwork they want. And they're the ones that determine whether or not it's fraudulent to begin with. So one has to wonder exactly who that alleged records coordinator is. And as usual, these people like to hide behind some sort of lofty position, the cat's paw, if you will, which of course is fake. There's no real person there. And so people go trying to hunt down the Chief of Police, etc., but that's not the person who has the operational capacity. It's the administrator. And that, in general, is the individual who is in most cases, the shot caller operationally, and that is the person that you would want to take out and find. And I'm sure that their identity is fake completely, 100%. And even if it's not, they're still probably just the face for somebody else. That somebody else is the question. And that somebody else is the one creating these types of papers. The original author. Upon completing page 2 of the Warrant Registry Information Packet titled Leads, Caution Checklist Appendix B, members shall determine the caution and/or medical condition, CMC, field codes based on the CCH or other known information. After entering the warrant information, the records coordinator shall document the LID, L-I-D, Lima India Delta, Leads identification number in the warrant logbook next to the subject name. The second check of the entered information shall be conducted by the Department Leads Terminal Agency Coordinator TAC or Assistant TAC, Tango Alpha Charlie, within 24 hours to verify the accuracy of the information entered. After the second check is complete, the warrant registry packet shall be filed and sorted by the subject's name in the active warrant file cabinet located in RCC. RCC shall have 24-hour access to the active warrant file cabinet. The warrant registry information packet shall be placed in the appropriate bin located in the Radio Communications Center. RCC shall request approval from the watch commander prior to dispatching a unit to pick up any subject. They love that use of the word subject, sort of like a king's subject. You are subject of the court. RCC shall coordinate a meeting place and dispatch a unit to pick up the prisoner. So now we go from subject to prisoner as a label, a clearly emotionally charged term or label, an accusation, if you will. Because it sounds like this person is attempting to be, the author is attempting to seem detached. But if they were detached, they would use a word maybe like individual, or the person who is to be picked up or something, right? They would use vague, non-emotional terms that do not ascribe guilt one way or the other. Well, at least as far as most people understand to be guilt. Culpability would be a more applicable term. Guilt is a feeling again. Culpability is actually being involved and being the state of mind to be held culpable for something. So, culprit is generally speaking a term that's culpable, but in order to call someone culprit nowadays, you are saying that they are indeed culpable. And they're using the word prisoner and subject. Well, they're using the word subject sort of like a word of ownership. They're using the word prisoner as an accusation, as you would call somebody a criminal or a felon, trying to reduce them down to a simple name, label. Now, this example is of the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority Police Department. Isn't that interesting that the Metropolitan Housing Authority is the one doing this? At least that's the cover. Now, under officer requesting warrant, we have a detective assigned and supervisor approving warrant. Now, those are the individuals, if they are in fact real, that you would want to get a hold of to ensure that you stop whatever little treasonous garbage that they're doing here. Because first of all, they're not law enforcement. They use that label as a cudgel to belligerate violent confrontations as an enemy occupying force. That's what they are. And every single member who has ever taken an oath of allegiance to the Constitution is bound by that oath to automatically be in opposition to these individuals. And no matter how much they try to associate law enforcement with military, they are not the same thing. They will never be. Law enforcement lacks the training and capabilities, and nowadays are just simple subcontracted security guards. They will never, ever, ever, ever be actual, in fact, practical allies, and that is simply done as a diversion and a deception, and the individuals doing it intend fully in the future to have wiped out every individual who has ever worn a U.S. military uniform because of the oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution, and that's the reason for it. So whether you want to accept it or not, if you have joined the military and accepted an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, you are automatically, whether you like it or not, in opposition, in natural opposition to so-called law enforcement. And that's, of course, what this stuff is proposed for, to be leveraged by the quote-unquote records coordinator to be able to leverage the fake law enforcement army against veterans and military specifically, and obviously against armed Americans in general as well, considering all of those people are risks to control. In this paperwork, we will discover that that is exactly what the motive is here. First, for the Leeds caution checklist, we have armed and dangerous. That's very vague. There's many types of armed and dangerous, but they break it down further. CCW, that person is carrying a quote concealed carry weapon. Now, everybody who's ever gotten the license has always been worried about this being used as justification by the criminal elements that in fact issued the CCW license to begin with, and used as a mechanism to target them. And in fact, this is showing that that's exactly what the purpose is, because that will give you the check mark. On the other hand, the records coordinator can fill these check marks in with whatever they want. They could list no CCW when a person is in fact carrying a CCW. Thus, those officers, hunky-dory, think they're going to be going into a perfectly safe situation where the person is going to be quote-unquote compliant, and all die. And the person doing this stuff, the records coordinator, wouldn't give you know what. They wouldn't care. None of these people would care. This is all designed to leverage a bunch of ignorant, bimbo, subcontracted security guards to take the fall for their criminal enterprises and to essentially harness an army of ignorant minions. Improper handling of firearms is listed here, and that's a very odd box to have for a check mark. Escape, weapons under disability, I think we know what that is. Any crime where a weapon was used, and any crime where a weapon was used. So, you could have purchased a weapon and you could have been caught speeding. And that's a crime where a weapon was used because it was being carried. And thus they can redefine what exactly a weapon being used is. The simple carrying of a weapon could be a weapon's use. Or it could be that you violate some kind of regulation at the range, and therefore you have a crime where a weapon was used. Right? A bunch of different ways you could construe that. Voluntary manslaughter, attempted murder, and murder. Now, violent tendencies for caution indicators include explosives. Now, when we go down to the next field, we find out, well, a field below the next, because there's two paragraphs next to it. When we go down there, we find explosives expertise listed under caution and medical conditions CMC field codes. Since when is explosives expertise a medical condition? Is that interesting? They also have martial arts expert listed under medical conditions, violent tendencies, and again, armed and dangerous. Caution to be exercised. Like I said, they can fill these check marks out as ever they want. If they want to make a so-called cop feel, afraid, then they fill in all of these. Now, if they want the cop to feel unafraid, even though they're walking into a situation where, in fact, these things are present, as far as they're considered anyway, they could just leave them blank, right? Now, actually, under specific medical conditions, we have heart condition, alcoholic, allergies, epilepsy, suicidal. Oh, that's a big one right there, right? Suicidal. Medication required, hemophiliac, and diabetic. And of course, all that information is supposed to be quote-unquote doctor-patient confidential or hospital or whatever nonsense, right? They always say whatever they want, then say something and do whatever they want. Caution indicators must be used if any of the above appear on the subject's CCH record. These reasons can be used even if the subject was charged and not convicted. NCIC does not allow, that is that one reference before, NCIC, that's November, Charlie, India, Charlie, does allow for an other category. This gives the agency the discretion to decide if another medical condition applies or caution should be exercised for a reason not on the list. However, if using other for a caution not listed, you must consider, does it really affect the safety of the officer, i.e. breaking and entering, menacing? Like I said, that's what they want to know. That's what they care about. They don't care about anything else. This gives you the understanding of their intention and the motive behind this paperwork to leverage a military operation against Americans and U.S. citizens and the people and the country. The people, of course, being the nation and the country being the land. The entry of HIV positive and AIDS as a medical condition is not permitted. Personnel shall initial each line after completion. Social security number and date of birth checked with BMV/CCH, and there's of course an ulterior motive for that nonsense with the vehicles. Date of warrant is date issued by court or date charges are filed with the clerks. 3 months validation check by, 2-year validation check by, warrant canceled by, and reason warrant was canceled, and all of those sections have dates associated with them. And of course, the simple filling out and processing of that paperwork is sufficient, regardless of whether it's fraudulent or otherwise, because this is not in adherence to the U.S. Constitution. This is in adherence to their rules and procedures, because they are the sanctity of law enforcement and they are above questioning, whereas that's what they would like to see it. But either way, all members of the armed forces, whether they're prior, current, or, well, you can't really have pre, but either way, if they're prior or current, in active positions anyway, because, as the saying goes, once a Marine, always a Marine, but I would say that actually applies to all branches, because no matter how many ways you want to slice it, people who get out of the military, and when they're real, of course, command and demand respect from everyone, the public at large, and so forth, they do stand out, and they will always be separate, because they are no longer civilians. Police, sheriffs, highway patrol, all of those people can take off their uniforms and blend into any crowd and look like everybody else. That's because they are civilians. They are not military. The big deal here, of course, is that this is the constitutional definition of treason. In addition, the Constitution lists law enforcement as being the militia, as being all those that can keep and bear arms, regardless of whatever ridiculous arguments that attorneys want to revise into the U.S. Constitution electronically. Of course, it could also be a computer program doing it. You could have quote-unquote licensed attorneys with special access codes and usernames and whatnot into the Amazon Web Services.gov account, in which they can go in and, in fact, at will change things, and that could even be the software that runs the court system today and populates fake judges and these warrants and just basically about whatever they want. And the only people who will refuse to go along with it are individuals who are knowledgeable that it is illegitimate. Thank you.